Now, I doubt that this is the first training program on health and safety you'll have ever seen, but it could be one of the most important. It's about the hazards we come across at work. It's about the risks created by those hazards, and most importantly, it's about the way we identify the hazards, assess the risks, and devise safe systems of work, no matter what work we do or where we do it. Now, there is a chance that by the end of this program, we might not have featured the kind of work activity that you're familiar with. But as I've just said, the principles of risk assessment are the same, whether you work in television or in an office, a warehouse or production area. But why should we carry out risk assessments in the first place? Well, to start with, the law tells us we have to. And by the way, there's nothing new about this. Risk assessment has been an implicit duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act since 1974. Putting it simply, employers cannot effectively discharge this duty without first assessing the risks to health and safety. But the most modern examples of health and safety legislation make risk assessment an explicit duty. Then, of course, the most compelling reason for risk assessment: to prevent accidents, injuries, and illnesses, and in turn, do something about the billions spent every year in court cases and insurance claims. In this program, we're going to deal with the question, how do I actually go about the business of risk assessment? But as important as knowing why we should assess is knowing exactly what we should assess. Let's go back to a couple of the examples that we've already seen. The first thing we've got to look at is the hazard. This means something with the potential to cause harm. Now, in this case, it's not the chair, but the way the chair is being used. In other words, an unsafe act or method of working. The next thing we need to look at is the risk, and this means the likelihood of the hazard, the potential to cause harm, actually being realized. In this case, how likely is it that this person will fall? Then finally, the assessment itself. And the assessment is the likelihood of the hazard and the risk coming together, accompanied by appropriate arrangements to ensure that that coming together doesn't happen. In this case, the arrangements are fairly straightforward.
Hey, Chris, what are you doing? How long have you been doing this job? Next time, use the ladder.
But I hadn't got
what
time.
If you fall and break a leg?
I hadn't got time
Somebody's
to find
got
them.
to fill your job. You have
Yes,
days
well,
off, you got this
I
thing.
think we
That's
can
not
leave
the
that
point.
one there.
Fall off of that, you fall through it, you break your leg.
Now, although our electrician looks like he's using something appropriate to stand on, there is still a hazard. In fact, there are two of them. Firstly, the steps are metal and could become a hazard should they happen to make contact with a live cable. Secondly, what about the people underneath? Don't forget that a hazard is the potential to cause harm, and that doesn't just mean harm to the person actually doing the job. As far as the risks are concerned, well, in both cases, there is a likelihood of the potential harm being realized. The assessment, therefore, must result in arrangements to stop the hazards and the risks coming together. A wooden ladder instead of a metal one. A safety chain in case the lamp should slip. And a safe system to prevent people walking below. By now, you should have a pretty good idea of what a risk assessment is and why it must be carried out. The next thing is how. Well, let's start with the first of our three main examples and introduce you to Jim and Alec.
Jim, got a minute?
All right, Alec. What can I do for you?
I need to spend a couple of minutes seeing what you do.
What do you mean?
Health and safety, Jim. Need I say more? Nothing to worry about, just carry on. Forget I'm here.
All right. Fair enough.
So, any problems?
What do you mean?
With the job? These boxes, are they okay? Not too heavy?
Yeah, they're okay. Alec, what are you getting at?
I'm trying to carry out an assessment, right? I'm on the lookout for any risks to your health and safety. It is in your interest, Jim.
Oh, I see.
Good. So you haven't got any problems?
Well, there's that Bolton order. That's not working out too well.
The Bolton order?
Yeah, the components coming in for D-Shop. I mean, look at them. They're all over the place, falling out of boxes, and they're covered in grease.
Well, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, of course it shouldn't, but it does.
OK, I'll have a word. So, anything else?
What do you want to know?
Any aches, pains?
Well, no more than usual.
Good. OK, thanks a lot, Jim. That's, well, just take it steady, all right?
Now, that assessment was a complete waste of time. The truth is, some assessments may only take a few minutes, others longer, but all assessments must be thorough. Our man Alec didn't seem to know much about Jim's job. He didn't involve Jim in the assessment, he didn't bring any notes, and he didn't take any notes. Basically, he made it up as he went along. Now, that's a pity, because accidents involving manual handling operations cost millions of pounds every year, and many of the resulting injuries are both painful and permanent. So what should Alec have spotted?
Nothing to worry about, just carry on. Forget I'm here.
All right?
Before Alec got himself into a position to spot anything, he should have done his homework. The manual handling operations regulations actually define what an assessment should consist of. First, the task. Does it, for example, involve reaching upwards or twisting from the trunk? Then there's the load. Is it difficult to grasp? Is it too heavy? Is it sharp, hot, or otherwise potentially damaging? Then, the environment. Are there good lighting conditions? Is there sufficient space? Individual capability. Does the job require unusual strength? Does it require special information or training? So, a risk assessment that ended up being no assessment at all. But what happens to Jim? Well, nothing. Unless, of course, he has an injury, because that's when Alec, his manager, and the company find themselves in deep trouble.
Take it easy, mate. What's that? Take it easy. Let's take it.
I can only tell you that as far as the legal position is concerned, we seem to be heading for an expensive court case that we can't win. But as the company's legal advisor, I have to try to put together some sort of defense. Now, you say an assessment was made, and yet you have no record of it.
That's right, I was going to write something up, but, well, I just forgot.
Forgot. You realize that you have a legal requirement to record assessments?
Yes, but you know how it is. I mean, things have been very busy here lately. Anyway, Jim should have known better. It was as much his fault as anybody else's.
Oh, so then the assessment would have recorded the fact that Jim had received proper training? And what about your competence?
I'm sorry?
Well, another legal requirement is that assessments must be carried out by competent people.
Look, he's the most experienced supervisor I've got.
I'm sure he is. But competence means having the necessary training, experience and knowledge. For example, was he experienced in Jim's actual job? Did he know the hazards and risks to look out for? Was he trained in manual handling techniques?
I've been on a lifting course.
When?
Can't remember exactly. A few years ago.
I think that makes the point, don't you? Risk assessments must be carried out by a competent person, someone who knows what to look out for. And risk assessments must be properly recorded. All I can say is that it's a real shame about Jim. Okay, let's look at a positive example of risk assessment. In the second program, we'll be looking at this in more detail. It's an assessment checklist designed to make the whole process of risk assessment easier and more thorough. Now, it may not suit precisely the tasks you will have to assess, but it does contain the basics. So let's see it being used as Jackie meets Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. How's it going?
Ah, assessment time.
That's a good start. You've actually read a memo at last.
Looks a bit official.
It's my checklist. Don't worry, it doesn't bite.
So this assessment then, everybody in the organisation has to have their jobs assessed to make sure there aren't any risks to health and safety, right?
Right. If you just carry on as normal, I'll watch for a while, if that's okay.
Fine by me. Yeah. Peter, yeah. Yeah, hold on. 7 on the 14th. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I got here. Yeah, okay. Cheers, bye. So how's it going?
Well, your chair's adjusted in the right position, and you're using the footrest, which is good. But your keyboard?
What about it?
Well, it's too close to the edge of the desk. That means your wrists are continuously bent in the same position. That could lead to problems.
Well, how likely is that?
You mean how great is the risk? Well, that's something we've got to decide. In this case, I'd say the risk was low, because your job doesn't require continuous periods of keying in. If it did, then I'd say the risk was medium to high.
Now, you mentioned a couple of things.
Okay, there's a lot of reflective glare on the screen.
I've got used to it.
It's still a hazard. It could cause eye fatigue.
Could?
Again, I'd say the risk was low, because you're not looking at the screen for long periods of time.
Good.
To start with, Jackie is involving Jeff in the assessment. See, it's all very well saying, but the employee has to cooperate. What you really want is their commitment. Perhaps the most important point of all is that Jackie is competent to carry out the assessment. As a supervisor, she had special training in the use of display screens, which included a detailed look at the requirements of the display screen regulations. As far as the checklist is concerned, we've asked the first 3 important questions. Firstly, are there any hazards associated with the task likely to affect health and safety? Secondly, what is the risk of those hazards causing actual harm? And thirdly, the assessment itself. What are the chances of the hazard and the risk coming together? And what arrangements can be made to prevent that situation occurring? Of course, an assessment is a lot more than just an official piece of paper. If hazards do exist, and there is a risk of actual harm, employers have a legal responsibility to take all reasonable steps to remove the hazards. But removing hazards is not always possible, which means that the hazards must be controlled. Let's go back to Jackie and Jeff.
Okay, we could sort out the glare problem by using blinds.
And I'll just do this. And there's another problem solved.
For how long, though?
What do you mean?
Well, I think we should look for a more permanent solution. Now, we can't nail the keyboard to the desk, but what about the way you work? The way you organise things?
Could be better.
Did you read your copy of this?
I know I had one.
All right, take this one. There's a lot of general information and a section on how to avoid things like repetitive strain injury through better work organisation.
What's this got to do with the keyboard?
Well, at the moment, there's not enough room on the desk to put it where it should be put. But if you can get rid of a few things, use a document holder.
Yeah, I get the point.
Good. Now then, what about your general health?
Pretty good?
Any headaches, sore eyes during the day?
No?
Good.
Okay. A pretty thorough assessment. Now, we've just seen Jackie using the last 3 sections of the checklist. Controlling hazards or risks that can't be removed, looking at any physical characteristics that might influence the health and safety of the individual, and considering monitoring procedures. All she has to do to complete the assessment is sign and then file the document.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. It's worth noting that in a situation where a group of people are doing the same job in the same location, a model assessment can be made. In other words, one assessment can be applied to the whole group, provided, for example, that there are no major differences in physical characteristics. In our first 2 examples, we've seen detailed risk assessments being made, or, in the case of poor old Jim, not being made, under specific legislation, namely the Manual Handling Operations Regulations and the Display Screen Regulations. You also know that assessment is an explicit duty under other regulations, such as personal protective equipment at work and the control of substances hazardous to health, or COSH. A working knowledge of the relevant regulations is therefore crucial in carrying out an assessment. Now, don't forget that where no specific guidance is given, assessments must still be carried out as a general duty under the Management of Health and Safety regulations. For the most part, assessment is largely a matter of common sense, and the checklist we've provided reflects that. But you will have to make sure that however you carry it out, it must be thorough. You can't afford to miss anything or leave things to chance. Okay, let's look at our final example.
Tim, sorry, could you spare a few minutes?
Now, Graham, the one with the beard, is a production manager. Roger, the one with the suit, is a safety advisor. The story so far is that Tim, he's the worker, has just got back to work following an accident. He tripped on a chisel lying on the floor, cut his foot, and was off for a week. Roger believes that the original assessment wasn't carried out properly. Graham, on the other hand, disagrees, and now they're going to have, well, let's just say they're going to have a few words.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Hazards. We couldn't find many of those. Well, apart from the solvent we were using.
What was the problem with it?
Fumes, mostly. Nasty stuff, as it turned out.
As it turned out? You mean you hadn't spotted the problem before?
Well, obviously we hadn't. If we had, we'd have done something about it, wouldn't we? Anyway, we considered putting in a booth with extraction equipment. But, well, after a bit more investigation, we came up with the solvent we're using now. It does the same job, but without the fumes.
Well, you proved it doesn't always cost money to remove hazards. What are your arrangements for noise?
Well, we don't get that very often.
What do you mean?
Well, it's only noisy if the machines are operating together, and it doesn't happen very often.
So how often does it happen? Once a day? Once a week? 3 times a month?
Not very often.
I'm sorry, Graham, but I don't think that's good enough. When it does happen, it represents a hazard with a risk attached to it. So where are the arrangements?
Look, every person in this shop has had a briefing about noise. We've had the levels measured, and noise is not a problem, providing the 2 machines aren't operating together for longer than 10 minutes. Everyone's issued with ear protection, which they use if they want to.
Fair enough. So what about Tim?
Well, Tim's job's pretty varied, but mostly he's on that machine. We make the packing cases for Precision Instruments, so there's a lot of detail work involved, drilling, routing. Tim's had training on the machine's got the appropriate guards, and it's got a maintenance log.
Protective clothing?
Eye protection for routing tasks.
Safety boots?
No specific requirement.
But given that Tim cut his foot open in a chisel, don't you think there should have been a requirement?
Look, Tim cut his foot open because the chisel was hidden under a pile of wood shavings. That only happened because Dick the cleaner was off sick. Now, you're not suggesting, are you, that the original assessment should have taken that into account?
I would have thought there were other reasons why safety footwear should be used. Look over here. What happens if one of those rolled off?
Well, that's a special.
I see. What about these?
They've only been there 2 days. Once the case design's been approved, they'll be going back.
Graham, an assessment is only valid as long as nothing changes. You've suddenly got metal components coming in here. And it doesn't matter whether they're in here for 2 days or 2 years. It's a change. And you've got to consider the health and safety implications. You've got a system for keeping floors clean. Suddenly the cleaner's off sick and the system falls down. That's another change. The bottom line is, an assessment is not a piece of paper you just file away and forget about.
Yes, I hear what you're saying to me, but I can't accept that we did forget about it. I mean, I think...
Now, I've mentioned several times the importance of being thorough when carrying out an assessment. But we don't live in a perfect world, and occasionally things are going to get overlooked. Just as important, then, is monitoring, keeping an eye on things, encouraging people whose jobs have already been assessed to come back to you if problems arise, or if something new develops, and reviewing the assessment should things change. New working methods, new machinery, or, of course, new people. In the second program, we'll be showing you some more examples of risk assessment. But as far as this program is concerned, we've already looked at the key areas. Identifying hazards, the potential to cause harm, looking at the risk, the likelihood of these hazards causing harm, and the assessment itself, the likelihood of the hazard and the risk coming together, accompanied by appropriate arrangements to ensure that that coming together doesn't happen. In Program 1, we looked at the reasons why we must carry out risk assessments. We explained exactly what a risk assessment is. Identifying hazards, in other words, the potential to cause harm, identifying the risk of that harm being realized, and making an assessment based on the likelihood of the hazard and the risk coming together, and then the arrangements that must be made to ensure that that doesn't happen. We told you that assessments must be carried out by competent people, and that assessments must be properly recorded. Finally, we looked at the importance of making sure that the assessment is thorough and that it is reviewed should circumstances change. In this program, we're going to consider some of the assessment criteria that should be applied to 3 different work tasks. Now, at this point, you should have 3 checklists in front of you. Let's start with checklist number 1, Kim Bailey. Now, Kim's been working in this job for just over 3 years. Like many people, she's simply got used to the hazards around her. We've identified 3 of them that should be picked up by a proper assessment. Spillages, very common in kitchens and a major cause of trips and slips. Manual handling, again a common problem, and if done badly, cause of often serious back injury. Machinery, another obvious hazard, particularly if the person hasn't received proper training and instruction. So what are the risks of these hazards causing actual harm? Now, if Kim used this part of the kitchen, say, only once or twice a day, then the risk of a slip would be low. But Kim's constantly moving through this area, so the risk of a slip is therefore high. Lifting heavy pots and pans is another regular activity, and the way Kim's lifting them would again suggest that there is a high risk of an injury. Machinery is almost always a hazard, but Kim only cleans this one. The actual operation is carried out by authorized people. The machine's properly isolated and no dangerous parts are exposed, so the risk of Kim having an injury, therefore, is low. On to the assessment then, and the first question: can the hazards be removed? Now, even though we'd like to think that people would take care in their work and prevent spillages from happening in the first place, it's not realistic to completely eliminate them from the kitchen. In assessing the manual handling task, we should be asking, can the need for manual handling be removed? Or if not, can it be done using mechanical aids? In this environment, short of redesigning the entire kitchen, it's not realistic to do either. Kim's cleaning of this machine represents a low risk. Now, obviously, we can't get rid of the machine, and even if we could, the machine itself is not the hazard. Kim, though, could be at risk because of her lack of operating knowledge. Now, even though the risk is low, this hazard can be removed by insisting that only people trained in the operating procedures may carry out cleaning operations. So how do we control the risks that cannot be removed? Remember that here we're looking for possible changes in processes or equipment, changes in working methods, protective equipment, and information, training, and instruction. We've already indicated it's not realistic to completely eliminate spillages from the kitchen, but even so, we should take all steps to put in place an effective preventive system. We should encourage the use of smaller, lighter pots and pans and make sure that the people who have to lift them are fully trained in manual handling techniques. Now, we haven't looked at every possible hazard in that example. There could be health problems associated with steam, cooking oil fumes, high temperatures. And don't forget that the checklist has a section dealing with health monitoring where necessary. Okay, let's move on to checklist number 2. Judy Whiter. This is Judy's second year as a laboratory assistant, and she can still remember much of the health and safety information she received during her first week, particularly on the use of chemicals. Most chemicals are a hazard, either causing fumes, or, if allowed contact with the skin, serious burns or other disorders. COSH, the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health, is one of the pieces of legislation to contain specific guidance on assessment and must be referred to before carrying it out. COSH requires, for example, that all chemicals, wherever they are used, must be properly labelled and kept in proper containers. Proper storage is another COSH requirement involving, in some cases, banning the practice of storing certain types of chemicals in the same place. And COSH also requires people to use the appropriate protective equipment where necessary. Now, you'll see from the checklist that as far as the use of chemicals is concerned, everything seems to be in order. The hazards have been identified, the risks quantified, and an assessment made resulting in clear and effective safety arrangements. But in this case, chemicals are not the problem. Emergency procedures are not an add-on. They are an integral part of each and every risk assessment and must be considered in terms of hazards and risks. Restricting access to this eyewash creates a hazard. Written instructions and arrangements must be clear. This sign is confusing, and the confusion constitutes a hazard. Now, when it comes to assessing the risks of the hazards causing actual harm, one has to say that with the other arrangements in place, protective clothing, for example, it is very unlikely that Judy would ever need the emergency eyewash. The risk could therefore be considered low. On the other hand, the likely severity of the injury Judy might receive if she did need it is such that the risk could be considered high. And the same sort of argument can be applied to the fire notice. A medium risk of fire occurring, but a high risk of serious injury, even a fatality, if it did occur. Now, in this situation, there's little point in considering how these hazards might be controlled, since they can both be easily removed. Apart from demonstrating how crucial it is to consider emergency procedures as an integral part of a risk assessment, that example was important for 2 other reasons. Firstly, the need to balance hazards against risks, bearing in mind the degree of severity should an injury result. And secondly, the competence of the assessor is largely determined by the knowledge, skills, and experience available to make that balanced assessment. Now, so far, we've seen examples of people doing their jobs in a single place. The legal responsibility to assess, however, applies to every person, whether they work in one place or not. So what then are the important considerations for, say, a maintenance worker on a large site? Someone like Andy Lee, the subject of our last checklist. These days, a lot of maintenance activities are now carried out by the same multi-skilled person. Andy, for example, could find himself working in a machine shop one minute and in an office the next. The range of activities can be considerable, and so too the number of hazards and risks he may be faced with. But the assessment must be thorough, which means identifying each and every activity. Now, the self-assessment form has been designed to make this easier. You'll find a copy in the pack that comes with this program. But don't get carried away with the idea that it replaces the need for a formal assessment. It doesn't. But sent out in advance of that assessment, it'll help the information gathering process by asking the person to list all of his or her activities and the sort of health and safety problems they may face. Further discussions with the person can then identify common denominators, such as working from heights, whether or not that means using a scaffold tower or a ladder, or working with machinery, whether or not that machinery is located in a machine shop or an office. The checklist then identifies the most likely hazards and the most likely risks, and is in categories rather than in the form of a specific list. When it comes to removing hazards, this may be tricky, since some hazards could be difficult to identify. Great emphasis, therefore, must be placed on self-awareness and the need to control hazards through training, instruction, and information. Any and every risk assessment must consider the hazards to other people. When looking at maintenance activities, this is particularly important. In Andy's case, the assessment should pick up the possible fall hazard resulting from working at heights. It should specify the safe working arrangements necessary to control the risk of a fall happening, and it should also specify the safe working arrangements necessary to ensure the safety of others. As I said at the beginning, we haven't specified every hazard or every risk associated with those three examples, but we hope we've given you a pretty good idea of what to look for. The assessment forms that we've provided may not include every detail relevant to your organization, but they will provide you with a sound basis for developing your own.